I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Right, it's simply great to have Frank Hadden here. I mean, it's super, absolutely brilliant. I mean, I'll tell you a wee bit, but you mostly will know that very much involved in the early days, in the early 80s with Murchison, big successes there. Very quickly moved on to what was Caledonia Reds, if you remember that, then Edinburgh Warriors, who became Edinburgh Rugby, and then in 2005, of course, he became national coach, picking up the very, very dirty baton that was left by his predecessor, and took the team through for 4 years. Fantastic. And been a huge servant for Scottish rugby. And I'll say it and not spare his blushes, that one of these people I feel in Scottish rugby who just doesn't get the recognition that he deserves. Dundee High School boy, then on to Strathclyde, I believe. Strathclyde, where he played rugby, top of both levels, then to down to Carnegie Institute in Leeds, further his education, his education career. Played at Headingley for a while and played in the first team from time to time, and now is, I think, retired happily, and spends, I think, a bit of his time. One thing I've got to mention, I don't know how many of you know this fantastic development that's happening at Bathurst. Have you seen the name? It's the surfing centre. Yeah, Lost Shore. It's the biggest single sporting development infrastructure spent, £60 million since the Commonwealth Games back in Scotland in 2014. It's a fantastic venue, run and the brainchild by Frank's son Andy. If you get a chance, go to it. Anyway, Frank's here to speak to us. We'll have our break. One of the things we need to talk to you about. Ken wants to say something, Andy to say something to you as well. But in the meantime, please welcome Frank Hadden.
Morning, gents. Can you hear me at the back all right?
Yep.
Thanks for that introduction.
Just the front that carry you, for the deaf ones in the front.
Thanks for that introduction, Mike. Straight out of Wikipedia.
Yeah.
A bit dodgy Wikipedia, I'd have to say, but reasonably accurate. It made me think about the first time I got introduced to the Scottish rugby public. I suppose that would be round about 97. It was just prior to my first tour with the Scottish national side when we went to Australia. And the back page of the Scotsman was an article by the then doyen of Scottish rugby writers, Norman Mayer, who was a personal friend. And the heading said, Rutherford and Hadden to coach the Scottish backs in Australia. And underneath it said, John Rutherford, 42 caps for Scotland, 2 British Lions tests, and Frank Hadden, whose brother once played for Celtic Boys Club. Oh, he was a pal. Anyway, I've been lucky enough, like you guys, to have enjoyed a long time, probably 60 wonderful years involved in rugby. And there's no doubt, in my opinion, it's easily the most fabulous and enjoyable team sport in the world. I can't see anything that's any better than this game. And one of the things that you think about over the years when you're looking back is that you never ever forget your first tour. Remember that? It brings back a few memories. My first tour as a 19-year-old at Dundee was down to London for the international match. We played a side in North London in the afternoon. But that's not the bit I remember most. The bit I remember most was being dropped off the bus in the middle of Soho on Friday night. We all went our different ways, but there were 3 of us wandering around Soho where we chanced upon a sauna parlour. We thought, well, you know, let's see what's going on here. And then we went, and they asked us to sign in first of all. And I looked at the book with the 2 guys that were in front of me, and I noticed that Alexander Graham Bell had just signed in. And also Billy Bremner. So So I signed in, I think it was Donald Duck or something like that. So anyway, it turned out that it was a massage parlour and it wasn't really a sauna. So I got wheeled into this room. I got laid on a small bed by an Eastern European woman, I think it was, who had almost stripped me naked before I got on the table. Lying on the front, she spent about 40 seconds on my back, whipped me around to the front and started working on the groin region. Then the words came in, extra massage, sir? Well, I had no idea what she was talking about. And she said, it's only £10. And I was weighing this up because I only had a tenner for the whole weekend. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and another massagist opened the door and said, excuse me, Billy Bremer would like to borrow a tenner. Another trip I won't forget is my first, 2006 I think it was, we were playing Wales in the Six Nations, and that trip down to Wales was the first match I've been involved in the Six Nations. Really excited, really looking forward to it. You'll probably be aware that on match day the itinerary is very tight. There's a massive invoice sent out to players which tell them exactly what's happening every minute of the day in the build up to the match. And traditionally you get some sort of police escort to the game. In Scotland, the police escort unfortunately stops at every traffic light. So everywhere else they go like the clappers, particularly in Italy and France. It's like a white knuckle ride on the way to the game. But anyway, in Wales, the detail is supposed to tie in with all the TV coverage and everything. And the route from our hotel to the ground hadn't factored in the fact that there was a pedestrian precinct that had just been built en route. So we ended up going along this pedestrian precinct and getting stuck behind a massive wall of people walking around the centre of Cardiff. and the bus slowed down to a snail's pace, and next thing you know we're 5 minutes behind schedule, then you're 10 minutes behind schedule, you're starting to get a wee bit twitchy, 15 minutes behind schedule, and now the players are getting really twitchy. And the physios are saying, oh, we better do some strapping on the bus. And the goal kickers are thinking, how am I going to get my goal kicking practice in? Because we haven't got enough time in the pre-match preparation. 20 minutes delay, and finally, the people in front of us opened up. And I don't know if you know the Millennium Stadium, you go down underneath the stadium. And so as soon as the people got out of the way, the police escort accelerated and the bus accelerated forward and then suddenly jammed on the brakes. Standing right in front of the bus, there was a bunch of lads, typical Scottish, kilts on, Scottish jerseys on, pint in both hands, standing in front of the bus going, way! And then the manager tapped me on the shoulder and said, Frank, is that not your two sons? Fortunately, they did me a wee favour after that, with a birthday coming up. At that time, England had advertised that they wanted to build a better North Stand, and one of the ways of funding it, they were going to get people to buy bricks, went to the ground behind the North Stand. Was anybody down there at the weekend? Nobody at the game? Anyway, next time, if you're ever going, have a wee look around the North Stand, because my son was told by somebody who'd worked at Twickenham that although Lawrence Delalio was in charge of the whole process, he wasn't actually paying any attention. And it was some Czechoslovakian bloke that probably didn't speak English all that well. So if you go to the back of the North Stand, in the Lawrence Delalio section of the Prince Oblensky Quarter, you'll see a brick that says Frank Hadden, Calcutta Cup winner, 2006 and 2008. I think they would be quite surprised when they realised that they put that through. So anyway, well done the lads. let me take you back to 1992 was really the first time I got involved with representative rugby. In fact, I coached representative teams all the way from 1992 right the way through to 2009. 17 years consecutively. And did I get a thank you letter when I finished? Not that I'm bitter about it. I remember that first year in '92, I was coaching Scotland under 16s, and after the first training session, it was quite clear we didn't have enough big guys. We were going to England. We played against England A, Yorkshire, and England on a wee tour. And I'd been involved with athletics at Merced Castle School for a few years, and I knew from athletics that the big guys in Scotland don't come from the central belt, they don't come from the borders, they come from up north, or they come from England. So trying to get hold of the rugby clubs up north, thinking surely some of you guys have got one or two big lads that might fit the bill. I got, after a few calls and a bit of a chat, I spoke to somebody at Edinburgh Wanderers who first introduced me to Jason White, who right out of the blue came through and ended up being my captain in 2006. And that's the sort of thing that you have to do, I think, in Scotland. I know there's a lot of controversy about the foreign players playing for Scotland. And just while we're on that topic, just a wee anecdote, a personal anecdote. I was never really comfortable with all that. In fact, I was on the visa application for Duhan van der Merwe. Fortunately, I got outvoted. Because I think we should be working harder to bring our own guys through, so that to have players playing for Scotland that everybody can identify with, and local communities can get involved in. But anyway, that business was really knocked it on the head. I was at hospitality at the Scotland-New Zealand game a couple of years ago, and VP van der Nel, is that his name? VP Nel, that's his name. VP Nel was getting his 50th cap, and he went up on stage, and he was awarded the cap, and he got the cap, and then they put the microphone in front of him, and he just cried for 5 minutes. He was so proud of what Scotland had done for him. And he was so grateful to the efforts of everybody over the years. And it made you think, actually, they do care, these guys. It's just a shame that they don't have the support network round about them that like a Border would have, or somebody from a local club. As was mentioned earlier, my first taste of professional rugby was in '97, when we decided to go pro with 4 pro teams. There had been a year where Richie was involved the year before. It was 30 odd guys were given pro contracts, and the following year they made 4 pro teams, and I was involved with the Caledonia Reds. And I have to say, it was a roller coaster ride. The transition wasn't an easy one. We started off, we went to speak to football coaches about what they did during the week. You know what they did during the week? Bugger all. They would do maybe 3 morning sessions a week. And in the afternoon, they would play golf, they'd go gambling, they'd go shopping with their wives. And so we started off on this fairly light approach to it. In fact, it was 4 mornings a week they did. I think I had the Wednesday off altogether. So we went for 4 mornings a week, but it was no good to us because we were getting absolutely pummeled in Europe at that time, especially from teams in Wales and France who were already semi-pro. You know, they were already doing 5 sessions a week in the afternoon, so they were comfortable with where they were. And we really didn't spend enough time in preparation. So after a couple of months, we thought, right, we need to do these double sessions. And I spoke to Paul Sturrock, remember him? St Johnstone manager at the time, because we trained at Perth. And he said, well, you know, it's not as easy as you think, because there's a history and tradition in football. And he said, when I was coaching at Dundee United, we captain came into me one day and said, look, the lads are not keen on the afternoon sessions. He said, well, I'm sorry, that's what we're going to be doing, afternoon sessions. He said, let's be honest, I'm going to be here longer than you. But then fortunately he moved on to St Johnstone, and at St Johnstone he was a really big deal because St Johnstone weren't as far up the league table as Dundee United, and he was an ex-international player, so he got his wish, and we about the same time started to train in the afternoon as well. Of course, that comes with complications because if you don't know anything about nutrition, why would you give them pie, beans and chips for lunch? Which is all, we didn't know any better at that time. Times have changed and moved on a lot. After that, well, I'll tell you what it was like at the start, because you honestly wouldn't believe this. But our challenge in the first year of professional rugby in 1997, the Caledonia Reds, was before Christmas, we wanted to get to 5 phases. And we never did. Now, there was reasons for it. There's a number of reasons for that. First of all, the skill level. You know, back in the day, the forwards were the forwards and the backs were the backs. And, you know, there was no reason why a back should be any good at rucking, and there was no reason why a forward should need to catch and pass. But that clearly has changed quite significantly over the years. But back then, it was really difficult to try and get anything going. There was the other issue, of course, was referees, because referees used to love to whistle, didn't they? And nowadays, they lose kudos if they go anywhere near 20 penalties in a game from their advisors or whoever's looking after them. But back then, they were happy to do 30 penalties, 40 penalties, and the game was just a massive penalty fest. You'll remember the days where if you didn't kick the ball off the mark when you're kicking a free kick or something, the referee would bring it back for a scrum. You see what happens nowadays? They dig their heel into the mark, and next thing they're 10 yards up the pitch, giving it a well. 2000, I was appointed Edinburgh coach, and that was probably the most enjoyable spell. 2005 with Edinburgh was a really enjoyable spell because we made a lot of progress during that time. Where's the chairman of the?
Yeah.
There he is. Would you agree?
Yes. The results weren't all that good sometimes.
So we started, the first couple of years we started off in the Celtic League, and that was an absolute nightmare. You had to, every fortnight on a Friday, you had to drive all the way down to Wales, no flying or anything. And you've got a giant second row in behind you with his knees up to his ears, and we're moving out of Murrayfield, and he said, "Are we nearly there yet?" We used to have to stop at service stations to loosen up and do a bit of touch and all that sort of thing. But the bottom line is, you really had very little chance of performing properly on the Saturday under these circumstances. They go into a different bed at night, they don't sleep well, all that sort of stuff. And it was really difficult. In the first season of that Celtic League, we won every single home game because Wales had to come on the bus too. And we lost every single away game. It was a waste of time, really. But fortunately, things moved on. It turned into the Celtic League. And we also got a little bit more investment. I don't know where the money came from, but to pick out the blue guys of the call of Brendan Laney and who's the other captain? Was a figure? Was that?
Todd Blackadder?
That's him. Absolutely fantastic captain. And we had a very promising group of youngsters, but we didn't really have an awful lot of experience in the time, and they brought that experience to the team, one up front and one behind, and it made a massive difference to us, and a lot of the guys came on enormously during that period. So much so that we had a spell where there was a league table created in France, which looked at all the results of all the teams in Europe and created this league table. And at one stage we were sitting in fourth, because we won every home game one season, and a shed load of away games as well. And I think we finished second in the league that year. And a year after that, we made it through to the quarterfinals of the European Cup, which is quite unusual for Scottish teams to get that far. But great experience. And in 2005, I moved on to the national team. To be honest, I wasn't that interested because I knew how difficult the job it was. And I think when Matt Williams, the Australian guy, had been appointed, I didn't even apply because I knew what a massive challenge it was, and I was comfortable. Now it seems that at least we've got most of the players playing in Scotland, but don't underestimate how difficult it is for the team to get used to Finn Russell when he's away at the weekend, playing the week before, and the recovery time it takes for him to get back onto the training pitch. It's not ideal having anybody outside the country, but I think that with the small number we've got nowadays, it's been a massive asset. 2010, I went for an interview down at Harlequins after the Scottish gig was over, and when I went down for the second interview, the reason I went down the first time is because my son lives in London and I hadn't seen him for years. Occasionally he'd wave to him in the stand or something like that. But it's a grueling business, professional sport. It really is a daily grind. You don't really get your Christmas days or your birthdays or all that sort of thing. You're just at it all the time. It never leaves you. And the opportunity to re-link with your family was something that I regretted missing all these years. And I was flying down to London for the second and final interview, and as soon as I got off the flight, I said, I'm not coming. I've had enough. But fortunately, the reason for my best excuse was the fact that I got a hold, I was involved with the Penguins, remember the Penguin Rugby? Sorry? So they had invited me to go to Asia for 2 years to do some coaching, and I thought, well, that sounds fantastic. That's right up my street. They have a 5 nations in Asia, but there's 28 countries altogether that play rugby, and over the 2-year spell, I visited more than 20 of them. But it was just fantastic fun to be involved in that. I remember when I came back after 2 years, I bumped into Chris Patterson. Chris Patterson said, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, you know how my wife, Claire, met your wife Sue, and Claire said, 'What's Frank doing just now?' And she said, 'Well, he's working with HSBC Penguins in Asian rugby.' And she came home and said, 'You'll never believe it. Frank's gone to Hong Kong to look after some penguins.'" My first trip from Hong Kong was into Korea, and you're coming off the plane with your luggage and you're expecting somebody to have your name up. So you're wandering around with your luggage looking for somebody that's got a taxi or whatever. And a very attractive young girl had my name in front of her, and I went up and I put my hand out and said, "Frank Hadden." She said, "So young." I said, that week I did some work with some of the juniors, and that's where I got a glimpse of how serious rugby is taken in different parts of the world. Korea has a very limited number of teams, and there's only a certain number of universities allowed to play. I don't know why. They just want to keep it under their control. But the comprehensive schools, there's about 10 comprehensive schools in South Korea that have a boarding section for rugby players. So they stay there full time. And of course, they're working every single day of the week on their rugby skills, and they're fantastic. There's just not enough of them. And also, that at that time, they didn't realise the changes that were going on elsewhere in the world. I mean, their throwers are still throwing in like this. Something you don't see all that often. But on the first weekend, another of the things that I had to do was commentate on matches, or co-commentate on matches. And I didn't really think about it all that clearly, because I only arrived at the ground an hour before the kick-off and had a look at the two teams, Japan against Korea. Ended up calling them number 8 and stand centre and so on. But do you remember the days at Murrayfield where all the school kids sat around the outside of the ground in the front 3 rows where all the school uniforms were? Well, sure enough, exactly the same in Korea. And in order to climb up the ladder to get to the viewing gallery where you were going to be commentating on the match, you have to walk in front of the school kids. And this was a school that I'd done some work at. And so I'm walking across the group and give them a nod, and the guy jumps to his feet and gives a massive the next one, I thought, well, you know, I didn't know whether I could just, or maybe a huge bow at the end or something like that. It was great fun. Yeah, another interesting time there. The Lebanon played Jordan in Dubai, clearly because Jordan weren't keen to go to Lebanon. But I ended up coaching both teams, and after the match, the captain of the Lebanon, who'd been at, he played for the England under-18s when he was at boarding school, the captain of the Lebanon team said, "I've just been speaking to my dad. He said he's really keen that you come to Lebanon and do some coaching." I said, yeah. What's your ground like? He said, "Oh, it's fantastic. The Hezbollah ground is a great facility." Yeah. I've also heard, you know, there's a bit of gunfire action going on in Beirut. He said, "Yeah, look, you can see the bullets from a distance. If you hear them going off, you hit the ground." Yeah, but kidnapping, you know, there's a lot of kidnapping goes on over there. He said, no, you don't need to worry about the kidnapping." Oh shit, that's why our second row's not here. I went to, another fantastic experience was Cambodia versus Laos. Bottom match of Division 5. The Laos winner weighed 49 kilos. About the same weight as Jonah Lomu's arm. But they absolutely love it. It's amazing the infectious enthusiasm that they have there. It's because we know it's such a fantastic game, it's not a surprise that everybody else thinks it's a fantastic game too. But in the aftermatch meal, the Laos captain got up to make his speech. And after he finished making the speech, by the way, I'd just like to say, we've got a punishment here of 2 Jaeger bombs for Frank Hadden for making our warm-up too hard. I came back to Scotland after that with a renewed energy for the game because, as I said to you before, it takes it out of your professional sport. In fact, I remember in the first year I was coaching Scotland, I had a good conversation with Eddie O'Sullivan, remember him, the Irish coach? And Eddie was very clear about it. He said, the longer you're in the job, the closer you are to the sack. The thing that had bugged me for a long time, I remember when I was Scotland coach that Curry Club, where I'd done a bit of coaching before, asked if I would speak at their under-18 youth dinner. And I said, how many sessions a week do you do? He said, 1. I said, come back to me when you do 3. Because I was always frustrated that obviously teaching at a boarding school, you've got plenty of time on your hands. And that was a massive advantage. But it's so obvious that that's the solution. If you have decent coaching for longer times, players get more skillful, they get fitter, the teamwork gets better. And that, you'll have all seen the progress that Ireland's made. I mean, I've got a great, I've travelled to Ireland a fair bit, I've got a lot of friends in Ireland, I know exactly what they're doing. And they do it brilliantly. But it all comes down to what they do in individual schools and clubs around the country. And the enthusiasm and knowledge that they're able to impart to these guys makes a massive difference. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was try and make a more competitive structure for our youth in schools. And it came about because there was an interview with, there was a Scotland strategic plan around about 2014, I think it came out. And I was asked to review it by the Glasgow Herald, and they put a 3-page spread in it. And each day there was 3 particular holes that I picked in it. And the first hole I picked is that we were the only remaining Scottish professional rugby playing country in the world that didn't have a clear pyramid from the bottom to the top. You know, even places like England, who are obviously a lot bigger than us, and France have junior teams beneath their pro teams. Now we didn't have that beneath our pro teams. And what they do, the difference that makes, is that there's a clarity for all the players when they start playing, wherever it is that they start playing. They see the route, they can see the ladder that if they make the right effort and they go to the right clubs, they see how they can get to the top. And a really good example, I think, of how we failed to understand the value of that pyramid is when you throw something like the Super 6 into the equation, which is just something that sits on its own over here. And it just amazes me that we don't have that pyramid. We do now, at last, but it's been a long time coming. There seems to be clarity about where we're going on the pyramid. The other thing that used to really bug me was when you go over to France to play a European Cup match in Toulouse or Perpignan or somewhere down south, and they ask you whether you want to train on a grass pitch or an all-weather pitch. Now you'd think they didn't need all-weather pitches down there, but they know the value of all-weather pitches, and the value to us would be enormous. And so I made that point. I'll tell you about what Mark Dodson had to say about that in a minute. But the third point I made was that the 40 pages of strategic planning for youth in schools, there wasn't one mention of the word competition. And what I picked up from travelling around the world is that that's the absolute beating heart of the development process in these other countries. And our competition structure, we'd maybe have a cup occasionally, but there was no sort of central organised league structure for schools and clubs. I worked in Australia in 1989 and 1990, and I worked at a really good rugby school up on the Gold Coast, which was an amazing experience back then. And they started their league structure in 1906. So they had a lot of experience. And when I turned up in 1989, their session, I was lucky enough to be involved with a guy called Barry Honan, who was a hugely influential coach. And I worked with him, and we did 8 sessions a week. Did 4 before breakfast, and 4 after school, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday lunchtime, we did video analysis back in 1989. And it took about 5 hours to cut and paste on the Sunday the results of the video thing back then. And the British Lions came to train at our school when they were on tour back in '89. And Ian McGeechan, who had played with Headingley, knew him well, and Roger Utley were the 2 coaches. And they said, I've got some nice video footage of Queensland and Australia. Would you be interested in seeing it? And Gage says to Roger Utley, any idea where the VHS is? And Roger Utley says, I think the boys were watching porn on it last night. That was why Australia was so far ahead then, because they did all that preparation. But then the competitive structure was such that it forced them to try harder and harder. And effectively it was a battle between the Protestant and the Catholic schools, and the Catholics always seemed to be prepared to go the extra yard and have an extra session. But it was a fantastic experience, and I knew that we could do something like that here. And so when that stuff landed in the Glasgow Herald, Mark Dodson called me in. Now Mark's not everybody's favourite guy, I would say. He wasn't my favourite guy that day, because when I arrived, he had his feet up on his desk. He didn't even get up onto his feet to shake my hand. I think he was thinking he was going to give me a dressing down. But to his credit, when we got, one of the things I told him about the all-weather pitches and how vital they were and how hard they were enough, and we needed to have a strategy for putting more of them around the country. He said, "Oh no, we've got loads of them." And he shouted to somebody, "Get the list of all-weather pitches." So about 5 minutes later, the list came in. And there were 16 all-weather pitches in the whole country. But 9 of them didn't have rugby markings or goalposts. So I said, let's be honest, that's not all that helpful. But when we got into the subject of creating a league structure for youth in schools, he actually took his feet off the desk and said, "That sounds a good idea, let's do it." He called in a guy, Colin Thompson, some of you might know, worked at SRU for a long, long time. Colin came in and he was the organiser, planner and all that sort of thing. Anyway, a couple of years later, we got there, and I'm proud of what's happened with the development structure. The trouble is, 2 years after it started, I went to a board meeting at Murrayfield, and there was an accusatory finger pointing where somebody said, "But you told us the games were going to get closer, there was not going to be too many one-sided games." I said, "No, I told you everybody was going to try harder." And what the evidence we've got is that the schools and clubs that were training once a week are training twice a week. And the ones that were training twice a week are doing 3 or 4 times a week. But the trouble is the schools that were doing 4 times a week, they're doing 8, 10, 12 times a week. And that makes the massive difference. That's the sort of thing that they do. There's 24 schools in Ireland that do that. I'm just talking about first of team level, I'm not talking about under 13, but you know, when you get to the top upper echelons of schools rugby in Ireland, the standard is unbelievable. And we can do that ourselves if we just have the right attitude and the desire to get to that situation. We've got a lot of very talented coaches in the country. And I note this year for the first time that the first division club league at under 18 level, they've all got development coaches who are in charge of the whole process. And that's something that's 10 years late arriving, but it's a really good idea to try and make that work. Yeah, typically in Scotland it's not all plain sailing. When you put something in place and then you leave it and think everything's going to be hunky-dory. It was unfortunate that COVID came along, but the COVID period, SRU in their wisdom had appointed a lady called Sheila Begbie to run the stuff. It's essentially the conference structure. And you know where she came from? The SFA. She was a footballer. And during her time in situ at Murrayfield, she appointed several SFA guys to be regional development managers in the country. Guys that didn't know anything about the difference between preparation for rugby and preparation for football and the different values and all that sort of thing. And it's incredibly frustrating. And during that time, there were teams started dropping out of schools and clubs that hadn't been dropping out. For example, in East Lothian is a really good rugby territory, as West Lothian is, and as the Borders are. There are plenty of areas in the country that have a real affinity for rugby and have real potential for rugby. But in East Lothian, it was the first time that all the schools in East Lothian had a team at every age group, because the development officer there, a guy called Fergus Pringle, who then moved on to Watsonians, when he was in charge, he knew how to do that stuff and be in charge of that stuff, and he made sure that all the primary sevens got access to rugby before they went to secondary school, so that at least they would know what was happening if they wanted to have a go in secondary school. And the secondary schools have got enough guys to have one, in some cases even two teams, and that was really growing in East Lothian, but it was just chopped in half with poor management, and it's slid away. It's coming back a wee bit just now, but I'm delighted to see that Linlithgow have made real progress at junior level. The very first conference in Linlithgow were, they won a league, I can't remember which league it was, but STV came along to the school to film. Chris Patterson was involved, and they filmed the handing over the trophies and all that sort of thing. And I thought it was a great moment until I met the headmistress, who really said, no, well, it's really good, I hope the boys really enjoy themselves, and it's great for the school and all that sort of thing. I said, yeah, but what are you going to do about it to make it better? Well, that's up to the club. We don't have anybody here that's interested in that. So it's frustrating, because the trouble with a lot of sport is people think it's just leisure or recreation, but it's not, it's sport. And in sport you want to get better, and you want to do well, and you want to win. And that's really the massive difference between leisure and sport. Recently I had a meeting at Murrayfield where I was trying to punch a bit more life into the conference structure. And it was weird sitting around the table. Gordon, you have sat around these tables before with committees of people. And there was probably about 12, 15 people around the table. And I realised after speaking for a few minutes about what was required to turbocharge the conference structure, to make it better and more sustainable in the future. And there wasn't one, I was the only person in the room that wasn't wary about losing his job or damaging his club or damaging his school position. And having a Scottish coach, occasionally you spend time on Premier club meetings and all that sort of thing, and there's just no agreement out there. You just can't get people who work in certain, who are playing against each other to agree to stuff like that. And it's so frustrating. But the guy, John McGuigan, is the new chairman. I don't know if anybody's come across him. He's not a rugby guy, but he's a really decent, smart guy. And I've spent a bit of time with him, encouraging him to try and, again, turbocharge this youth and schools thing. And I said, what you don't want is somebody like Jim Mallender. Jim Mallender was a professional something or other, performance development, that's right. Said, you don't want a performance development guy who's going to tinker with the professional teams. I said, our pro teams are professional, and they know what they're doing, and they should just be left alone. And if they fail, then you get somebody else in to do it. You don't need to have like a spare guy going around tinkering and trying to advise when he doesn't really know it comes from England. He doesn't stay here at the weekends. I said, what you need is a guy like David Nucifora. He said, who's David Nucifora? I said, well, I used to work with him in Australia a wee bit, and I know his family really well, and I know exactly what he's done in Ireland. What he's done in Ireland is, he told me straight away that you don't tinker with what's going on at the top. The bit that you really need to sort out is the pathway bit just underneath the pro teams, and you need to get that really functioning efficiently and enthusiastically by all involved. When he appointed David Nucifora, I said, somebody like David Nucifora, I didn't expect to actually go out and get him. But even though he's only part-time, I think he'll be a massive influence in this area. So get ready to turbocharge your under-18s. maybe just to finish, you never really quite know to finish because it's very easy to blather on, but just something that's always stuck with me about why it's such a fantastic game. And I remember after we played New Zealand, maybe about 2009 or something like that, and well, it must have been earlier. And in the changing room afterwards, Scott Murray came up to me and said, "You'll never guess what happened." I said, "What?" He said, "I was lying, wedged in the bottom of a ruck, and my face was touching Tanu Umanga. And Tanu Umanga said to me, 'You see, Marty Leslie's got engaged.'" Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks.